Welcome to Anxious Tea Time, the show where we discuss the wonderfully different aspects of mental health.
I'm Ellie.
And I'm Gulli.
This week we're going to talk about a very sensitive and dark topic, but it is something that needs to be discussed. This week we're discussing suicide and self-harm. We will try to avoid graphic descriptions as much as possible, but if this is something you for any reason feel isn't your cup of tea right now, that is very okay. We'll be back next week with a different topic.
If you struggle with either suicidality or self-harm, it is recommended that you reach out for help and support. Your GP can be a very good starting point. If you are currently a danger to yourself or others, please call 999.
Right, let's get to it. Worldwide and also in the UK, suicide is a significant issue. According to statistics by Samaritan, in 2018 there were over 6,507 suicides in the UK, which averages out to 16 suicides per day in the country. This is almost 11% increase from 2017 in the general population, but a 23.7% increase in suicides among those under 25 years old. Suicide is also the biggest cause of death for men under 45 years old. In the UK, men are 3 times as likely to die by suicide than women.
By themselves, these numbers are really scary, especially as the number has drastically increased from 2017 to 2018, and that's why it's a very important topic to discuss. There's likely been done tons of research on suicidality, so we do have a good overview of why it happens, potentially risk factors, and what can help to prevent suicides. So let's go through this piece by piece. This is going to be a bit more of a research-heavy episode, but we do hope you bear with us.
Yeah, so in terms of reasons why people do it and what can be relevant risk factors is a lot of us immediately think about depression, which is not wrong at all, as suicidality is a common symptom of depression. Researchers also found that people with diagnosed mental health problems have a higher risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviour.
The risk factors for suicide are complex, and there's really no single reason or explanations for why someone may commit suicide. There are multiple types of risk factors, including social, psychological, and cultural ones that might lead some of us to suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Several risk factors commonly act together to increase vulnerability to the suicidal behavior, and the World Health Organization has classified a few different risk factors.
The first topic will be individual factors. Now, there isn't a specific list for these, as it could be anything. It could be an event that's happened in someone's life. It could just be depleting mental health. So this is a complex topic that will help you understand why some people out of the blue can do something so horrible to themselves.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's very interesting when you say out of the blue, because some people might engage in suicidal behavior almost seemingly suddenly, and some people kind of had recurrent thoughts about suicide for years and years beforehand. And when we talk about individual factors, again, as you were saying, there's tons of different combinations. We talked about mental health difficulties, but interestingly enough, that's not the entire story, is it? There's a lot of research to suggest that a lot of people who commit suicide were never diagnosed with mental illness. Now, you can absolutely say it maybe they had mental health issues, but they didn't seek support, so they were never diagnosed. But it also seems that it's not necessarily something that just happens because of bad mental health.
Oh no, of course it could be anything, because of something bad could be happening in someone's life and they could be dealing with it perfectly fine on the outside, but even subconsciously they won't really know that they're not dealing it very well, and one day it could just be the final straw, because life can throw anything at you, good or bad. So if so many bad things happen, that could be that push that someone gets that just really doesn't help them through.
Yeah, and what you kind of tend to see when you do research on suicidal behaviour and you read articles of people who struggle with this kind of sense of isolation that can lead to suicidality.
Yeah.
If you think you're the only person out there who's had these thoughts, who considered something, who are going through these dark times, of course you're going to be way more reluctant to seek help, and then unfortunately end up in a headspace where, no one can understand this, meaning no one can help me, so I have no other choice, when this isn't true at all. In fact, there's a lot of research to suggest that I think it's at least 1/4, if not more, of people at some point in their life will experience suicidal thoughts. And it's not as uncommon as we might want to think in a way. One part of this might be due to media reporting on it. There's a lot of guidelines. Even when doing things like this about how we talk about things, what to report, what not not to report, because you do run the risk of having more copycat behaviour, or if you report too graphically on suicides, it can have a really detrimental effect. However, that can also stifle the debate and conversation a bit, because it's very important to talk about.
Yeah, because people have to know that they're not the only one going through this, and it's not just the thoughts as well. Every time something happens to someone, because of the people around them are not facing the same situation, their automatic thought is, no one has gone through this but me, and I'm even if they have, how am I going to find someone who feels the same way? But what people have to take into consideration is you don't have to find someone who's gone through the same thing as you. Talking about it with anyone, it could be a GP, it could be a friend or a family member, talking to anyone about it will make you feel significantly better.
Oh, absolutely. It's isolation that will get you mostly. Yeah. But I think also it's kind of important to distinguish between active suicidality and passive suicidality. Yeah. Active suicidality is, well, I have a plan of ending my own life, and something very concrete, which obviously is very serious. But I think what's very common is the kind of passive suicidality of, well, I have no plans, I won't do anything, but I do want to die, and if something would happen to me, I wouldn't mind it.
Yeah.
Which I think it's a lot more common, and it's rarely talked about. And I think it's something really, really common. Again, like, a lot of people do have these kind of suicidal thoughts of thinking, like, well, maybe I would be better off dead. Again, have no plans of acting upon it, but it's still something that can really drain you and can really, really impact your life.
Exactly. It's something that can really get on your mind when you have nothing really to do, because if you think about it, and it could really nibble away at your mental being completely, because it could just be something just like, oh, I've been having a really rough week, if something happened, it's not really that bad. But when you say that to someone, they'll take it as like a joke, because it's so common that everyone else sort of feels that way at some point. But if something was bad to happen to them, like just a bad situation, that could push that from passive to actively wanting to do something about it, which is a problem.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking a lot about, which I think can be incredibly detrimental. It's like, well, if you go yes and yes and yes with these passive suicidal thoughts, so like, well, I'm not going to do anything, but I wouldn't mind if something happened, then you can kind of become numb to your own state of mind about how serious that can be, and then it can very quickly change to being active, like, I'm going to do something, but the change won't be drastic to you, because to you, you've been balancing on the edge for so long.
Yeah.
Which I think it's so important to take even passive suicidal thoughts so seriously. Now, that doesn't mean that, like, oh, if you have any passive suicidal thoughts, oh, it's like the most serious thing, you're super sick, like, how dare you? Because again, they're quite common, but I think it's something that's definitely worth keeping an eye on and definitely talk to someone about.
Yeah, it's not something that you should just take nonchalantly. You have to think about everything when you start thinking about stuff like that, because obviously it could just be one of those days where you're just not in the mood, but it could be one of those things that could develop, so it's something you should keep an eye on to make sure it doesn't develop into anything serious.
Yeah, definitely. I think for a lot of us, passive suicidality can also become a weird form of a coping mechanism, like a really, really weird safety of, like, well, no matter how bad life gets, you always have the option of ending your own life. Now, that logic seems incredibly strange if you've never gone through this yourself, but it can be quite comforting to feel like you have an out if you need one.
Yeah.
Which, again, it makes sense, I guess, but at the same time, like, that can be, to count on that as a safety too much, can also be very, very scary, because there's a lot of other more constructive ways of coping that could be good. And I think I really want to touch on this later in the discussion when we kind of touch about self-harm as well, is that, like, well, dysfunctional coping or destructive coping is still coping.
Yeah.
Right, I think that's, like, something we'll always come back to, that, like, well, there's a lot of maybe behaviours or thought patterns we want to break in ourselves for multiple reasons, but especially when it comes to coping, it's, well, you need to acknowledge that even if it's not good for you, it serves a purpose. And you can't just take it away without replacing it with something else. Again, exactly. Like, engaging in self-harm, of course, isn't good for you, but it serves a purpose. And you need to really examine that and see, well, what else serves the same purpose without being as destructive to my well-being.
Yeah, that's completely valid. Another topic is societal factors, This can be anything from economic state of your country, which can bring people's attitudes down, to available support, stigma and awareness.
Yeah, definitely. Like, there's so much research to support that, like, well, based on the state of society or how you feel like society is going, can heavily influence suicide rates, which it leads into a very interesting discussion, doesn't it? Because obviously when we talk about suicide, of course it is to encourage individuals to get help, like all you out there who might be struggling, because there's like only you who can be able to help yourself. However, it is very important to acknowledge that this isn't just an individual issue. Like, of course you're affected by the world you live in. And again, if support isn't available, if there's a lot of stigma, if you do genuinely feel that you have no opportunities to reach out, of course that's going to affect your mental health.
Yeah, it could be a really big problem sometimes. Sometimes you just don't realise that it's happening to you. Because if you're in a situation where your economy isn't fantastic, everyone around you isn't in the best mood because of everything that's happening, because it has so many repercussions around everyone that it ends up impacting you without even you realising that it's happening.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think to kind of branch off from that a little bit, some things I think we have seen in like our student demographic, which we talked a bit about last week, is that it's almost dangerous in a way that, like, when the kind of general discourse or humour is very, like, I guess jokingly self-destructive, like, ha ha ha, I got an essay due this Friday, kill me.
Yeah.
And again, like, you know, I don't mind a few jokes here and there, but I think that can leave people who might need to reach out for help not taking themselves seriously, because it seems to be this kind of general opinion of like, ha 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 ha, university life is really hard, I want to die. And most of the people saying that are hopefully more like joking, to be like, this is stressful and that, whatever. But the few people who may actually be a bit genuine kind of get lost a little bit, and I feel like, we all feel this, so it's completely normal.
Oh yeah, and this can be the same for the economy. Everyone could be going around saying, life sucks, the world's coming into an end, and then you're just like, yeah, I understand. But then for some people, those sort of comments it gets into your head thinking, oh yeah, this is just a joke, I'm not going to take these feelings seriously, but then it leads to circumstances that no one really wants to be in.
Yeah, and I think like you can kind of relate that to relationship or like social connections as well, because like some of those interactions and jokes can actually be really valuable forms of connection and support. Yeah. Right? Like if someone's like kind of making the same a bit like disheartening jokes as you, that's a very good opening for, hey, you okay? Or like, oh hey, it's been hard lately, hasn't it? And you can kind of find solidarity with each other instead of both kind of brushing off to be like, everything is horrible, bye. Instead of being like, no, hey, how are you doing? Like I am struggling with these things. How are you been doing with these things? Because just like talking to someone and feeling like you're being heard and having someone at least like somewhat relate to you can be like incredibly helpful, because again, like especially around like suicidality, this kind of isolation around it can be detrimental.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. And even if it's a short-term thing, like this isn't someone that you're going to talk to for a long period of time, just that one moment can be that pick-me-up that someone needs. So if you feel like that you can't talk to anyone, like a friend or a family member, just going out and going to a society, if you're in university like us, and just having a conversation with someone, and if you find something in common, not even talking about problems specifically, just talking to someone can make you feel significantly better.
Yeah, definitely, and there's tons of research to support this as well. Like the people who do have more social connections or stronger relationships tend to do a lot better, and it can be very, very helpful when dealing with suicidality.
Oh yeah, because in terms of suicide prevention, reaching out is the most important part.
Yeah, on both parties. If you're struggling with suicidality, it is very important for you to reach out to connect with someone, even if that's a friend, a family member, your GP, or other means of support. But also I think it's very important for all of us to be aware about the problem of suicide and not be scared to talk about it. There is this misconception that you shouldn't ask someone if they're feeling suicidal because you might like plant an idea in their head, but this has been shown to not be true at all. Like that's not how it works. It's not like, I never thought about that, but now that you said it, I'm gonna go do it. Like obviously that's not what happens. And if someone is at least actively suicidal, there is a good chance that they will tell you, and there are a few warning signs you can look for in someone else in terms of suicidal behaviour.
Yeah, there are many different elements that you can tell. For example, there's verbal factors, like they will actually talk about killing themselves or say that their life has no purpose. They feel like a burden, they're feeling stuck in their lives, they're not wanting to exist. Sometimes these comments will not be said seriously, but in their heads they'll be completely serious. There are also things like behavioural markers. They'll isolate themselves from others, not really communicate with their friends or family. They may even start giving away their possessions or writing a will. They'll start living more recklessly, like driving. They'll also be more aggressive. It could be anything like increased drug or alcohol use, or searching about suicide on the internet, or mental health problems. It could really be a range of anything.
Yeah, and it can also be after like a dramatic life change as well, in terms of like a divorce, losing your job, or things like that. So again, it's not to be like always being really, really paranoid. It's just like kind of taking the opportunity to check in, like, oh, hey, I've seen you haven't doing so well lately. Hey, what's up? And kind of lead the conversation from there. And even if people aren't experiencing suicidality, or even if they don't want to talk to you, most people do appreciate that you looked out for them. Like the sentiment of like, oh, hey, thank you for checking in, because you feel cared for.
Yeah, because there's always that moment that someone will have is, does anyone actually care? And even if when you ask them if they're okay, they told you to leave them alone, if you keep trying to be there for them, they will notice this when they're really thinking about and getting really low about things. So you'll see, if you see any of these signs, even if they're not thinking about committing suicide, that is the prevention to getting them to that point in the first place.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be hard than saying like, oh, hey, I heard that you lost your job, or I heard about this. It seems to me that you haven't been doing too well lately. Hey, like, what's up? Do you want to talk about it? And even if you kind of get like, no, it's fine, you'd be like, okay, no, that's okay. Like, you know, if you need to talk, I'm here. And again, just like leaving the kind of door a little bit open can be very, very helpful further down the road as well.
And if you are feeling this way yourself, I know it's extremely difficult to reach out to people, but it's almost like giving yourself a chance. Before you make a final decision, you can't just pretend like you are nothing. You have to give yourself that chance and give others that chance to help you, because they do care about you as much as you don't believe it yourself.
Oh, definitely. Again, the best place to get support would be to reach out to either friends or family, call your GP. If you're an immediate risk to yourself or others, do call 999 or 111 if you need to talk to someone. Samaritans can be an invaluable resource, and you can reach them at number 116123.
Now we're going to be moving on to self-harm. This is also an extremely sensitive topic, so if you're not really up for it this week, then that's okay. We'll see you next week. What we're going to be discussing is what is self-harm and other aspects of it. Self-harm is deliberate injury to yourself. This can be in any different way.
Yeah, I think when most people hear the word self-harm, it's very common to just think about like cutting your skin. However, as you were saying, self-harm can come in all forms. I don't want to become too graphic, but it can involve like cutting, burning, scratching, hitting, or even poisoning yourself. It can also go a bit differently than that, which we will talk about, because self-harm can present in a lot more ways than you might intuitively think. Besides actively physically harming yourself, you can over or undereat, exercise excessively, pull your hair, or even get into situations where you know you will get hurt. That can be everything from engaging in more like risky activities, drugs, going out really late. It can also end up being like casual sex. Again, some of these things by themselves aren't necessarily self-harm, but they can be used as such, which makes the kind of discussion about self-harm very complicated.
Yeah, we don't just want to cover the atypical self-harm of hurting your skin. We want to show awareness of many different types of self-harm that people can do, and it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and self-harm isn't an actual diagnosis in itself. However, it's very common in multiple ones. And again, some people who self-harm don't necessarily suffer from any mental illness either. And there's a myriad of reasons why some people may choose to self-harm. A big one is definitely emotional control. If you're feeling very bad or like a very, very strong emotion, self-harm can be almost used to ground yourself or distract yourself. It can also be used for self-punishment, or in a way to try to express something that is very hard to put into words.
After self-harming, you may feel a short-term sense of release, but the cause of your distress is unlikely to have gone away. Self-harm can also bring up very difficult emotions and could make you feel worse.
And you also have this almost stereotype that a lot of people who self-harm do it for attention, which is a very complex topic in itself, because most people do not self-harm for attention, but also if you do, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, personally, I don't like to think of someone being attention seeking. I like to kind of think of it as them being support seeking. Like, if you like desperately need to communicate that you're in pain or that something's going on and you feel like you have no other way of doing that, that's a way of trying to express them. That's trying to seek support.
Yeah, that's clearly showing that there is something wrong in the first place, because if you are feeling perfectly fine, you wouldn't go as far as to hurting yourself to get this attention or to show people that there is something wrong if there wasn't. So even if someone is harming themselves to attention seek, that also shows that they do have a problem in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people, as we said, do self-harm as a way to almost cope with what they're going through, what they have gone through. And again, it's very destructive, and you should definitely seek help if you struggle with it. But again, as we mentioned earlier, like, dysfunctional coping is still an attempt at coping.
Yeah.
Like, you are still trying to relieve negative emotions, relieve stress, to make yourself be able to function properly in your life. Of course, then you do need to find other ways of relieving stress and to deal with emotions you feel without harming yourself.
Yeah, and another important thing that we should cover is if you do see someone close to you who has self-harmed, approach them about it very sensitively and assist them in finding help.
Yeah, definitely. And it should also be noted that it's a very dangerous mindset for someone self-harming or other people to have a kind of sense of, well, it's only bad if you see explicit, outwardly self-harm. Because first of all, as we discussed, self-harm can be very difficult to pick up on, but also self-harm is not the only way you can show that you're in pain, which can be one of the reasons why someone might choose to self-harm, is to be, please see the pain I'm in, please see me. So it's very important that you don't just check up on someone when you see that they have self-harmed if you know they're struggling. But again, I guess you just need to use your best judgment and be sensitive to the relationship you have with the person. Pointing out someone's self-harm wounds or scars or anything like that may not be appropriate if you're not close to them. But of course, if there is someone close to you, you know them the best, and you can more respectfully talk to them about it if you're concerned for their well-being.
What you have to take in consideration is there are alternatives to self-harm, and you have to be very mindful of what you're doing, because obviously not all self-harm is physical, so you could be doing it to yourself without even being aware of your actions and identifying the initial problems.
Yeah, definitely kind of be more introspective and like, why are you self-harming? Is it to control emotions? Is it self-punishing? And kind of try to find alternatives based on that. Like, you have very tangible alternatives. You can rip up paper, you can listen to music, you can remove yourself from the environment, but it all really depends on your own triggers and your own reasons. So obviously, reaching out is very, very important if you feel like this is a problem you can't handle by yourself, and just being very cautious in your own behaviour and your reasons for doing them.
Another helpful alternative to use if you do need a distraction is just finding small hobbies. It could be anything from just creating something new, it could be just cleaning the house every once in a while, it could be starting to do games, going outside and doing new things like sewing and painting.
Yeah, and if you're someone who self-harms, to kind of ground yourself, kind of engaging in other kind of sensory things can be really helpful, like eating spicy food, having a hot or very cold drink, going outside and kind of feeling very present, like different physical sensations besides pain can be very, very helpful to ground yourself in the moment as well.
So what you really need to know is that self-harm isn't your only option, and it shouldn't be your first or any option at all. It's not something that is very helpful, and an alternative action should be used.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember that self-harm is very common. It is nothing to be ashamed of, and it's something we should treat ourselves and others struggling with it with a lot of compassion. So if you are struggling with this and any other mental health difficulty, do take care of yourself, seek support when you need it. This has been Anxious Tea Time with Gulli
and Ellie,
and we will see you next week.